All right, buckle up. First of all, you got homework. If you're listening to today's episode and you have not listened to episode 102, which was back in May, 10th of May, I think is when we published that, you got to go listen to that first. That was part one. We're going to do a part two today. You've already seen our guest. Help me welcome back to the show, Jeff Hartwig. Jeff, how are you, sir?
I am doing great.
You're a man of many words. Thanks for that, Jeff.
Yep.
So Jeff, appreciate you coming back to the show. We had a really good time, really learning about Jeff, the athlete, right? We all have these different roles in our life, son, daughter, coach, athlete. And we really got to learn Jeff, the athlete, in the last show. And it was really interesting, to hear your journey and your story of really, to use the analogy of pole vaulting, of a lot of ups and downs, right? American record holder, no hiding. I mean, it was just, I don't know if it's the typical pole vault story, but it is very common pole vault story in the sense of, if you're going to be a good pole vaulter, you're going to take some L's along the way as well. So we had a lot of great feedback from your story, Jeff. Just so thankful that you would share that part of it. And so today I thought we would focus on, we stopped at the 2008 season where you made the Olympic team again. Amazing. And now what does a pole vaulter like yourself, what do you do once you stop pole vaulting? What does one do with themselves? I thought we'd start talking about. Yeah, go ahead.
A question that a lot of athletes struggle with all through their career is how do you transition from being an athlete? And the athlete, the life of an athlete, particularly the ones that have some level of success, and that's measured in many different ways. There's financial success, there's the accolades and the awards, and I always say not all event groups are created equally, and there's a lot of distance runners and sprinters that make a living running track that never make teams and never win medals. And then we see athletes from other event groups that tend to win a lot of medals and win a lot of championships, but really struggle on the financial side. Being a pole vaulter, you have the benefit of kind of being in the middle. You're not the top paid people, but there's lots of opportunity. So a little bit of success and you can make a career. And that's probably, I would say, as much as anything, I'm probably as proud of that I was able to build a house. I was able to buy cars, and I didn't buy Ferraris. I bought practical cars, but I was able to provide a living as a full-time professional athlete for my family for a number of years. And that is, to me, that's a great measure of success. A few years ago at the USATF convention, Max Siegel, our CEO, came in and he asked the athlete body, how do you define what a professional is? And it was remarkable to hear the responses from the athletes as to how they defined what an athlete was. And it ranged everything from you're only a professional if you've won a major outdoor championship medal, to if you don't have a job, you're a professional. And I said, well, there's a lot that don't have a job, but I think they're sleeping in their cars. So
that could also be called unemployed.
Yeah, that's right. That's the same thing as unemployed. And so, as I started to think about that, I was faced with the same situation that Earl Bell was, my coach. Earl knew that he wanted to stay involved with the sport in some capacity, and I had that same passion. I think that was the catalyst for me to continue through the years of the sport when I wasn't a great high school vaulter and I wasn't a great college vaulter. To continue was just a pure passion for the sport of track and field. And I didn't know where that would lead. And so through my travels and my longevity in the sport, I had made a lot of connections and built personal relationships with many, many people in the sport. I loved being around the sport at all levels. And so I was looking for opportunities. By chance, in 2003, at the Paris World Championships, David Hodge, the owner of Gill Athletics, had come and had invited me to go have coffee. And I remember sitting at this really cool kind of picturesque cafe in Paris on the sidewalk, watching people walk by. The Eiffel Tower is kind of off in the distance. And he had asked me at that point, what do you think you might want to do after you're done? And I said, David, I don't know, because it's hard to imagine that I'll ever find anything that I'm so much driven and quite as passionate about as the pole vault, and competing as an athlete. And it seems like there's a divergence between, as an athlete, you're very self-centered, and not in a bad way, in a very positive way. You have to be. You have to make decisions that are based on what's going to set you up to do it. But in the working world, many times you're serving others. You're servicing something, whether it's a service or a product or a commitment to help somebody else. And that all of a sudden now you're accountable to that, which is a big departure from being an athlete. But I had played kind of many roles through my life. And because I wasn't this natural phenom type athlete, I was a grinder. I was a guy out there that, I had to rely on other people to help me. And I felt like I was somewhat of I was accountable to them as much as I was to myself. So I felt like that was sort of a natural trait that I had that I could carry with me in a professional career. David ended up saying, when the time is right for you, I'm not saying when, but when the time is right for you, and I'm sure neither one of us thought it would be 5 years after that, he said, we'd like to talk. And I think there's something maybe you can do for us at the company. And I was obviously a big believer in the products and had a ton of success, my American records, making Olympic teams. And the equipment you use is very much integral and a very important part of an athlete's preparation, because, it's sort of like a race car driver. You can be the best driver in the world with the fastest car, but if your tires don't hold on to the ground, it doesn't work very well. And so you got to really look at all avenues. And I did. I was very diligent to explore every option to try to perform at the best level. And I found that the Pacer carbon poles were the poles that worked the best for me. And
how did that conversation, so 5 years later, when it was time, did you just pick up David and say, hey man, you remember 2003? You said, yeah. How did that conversation go to join our team?
Yeah, I think Dave is so much of not only a great person, but a great leader. And I would never have to call him out on something like that. He remembered. That was something that, I feel like I stayed close to him. He was supportive of me on a personal level as much as the owner of a company that supported me. And so it was pretty widespread news because of my age, turning 40 prior to the Olympic year. There was a lot of talk, a lot of conversation in that final year that was my last year. And so it really was sort of a really great swan song to go out on a high note, having made the Olympic team at 40 years old. That was never been done before. I was the oldest track and field athlete at the Olympics in Beijing. And that became kind of the side story. But David had even contacted me that year and said, the end of the season, let's get together, let's talk. And so I was more than happy to reach out to him and kind of follow up on that conversation and have a really great meeting and end up with a job out of the deal. At the same time, I knew I wanted to stay involved maybe at the elite level. So I actually was pursuing the opportunity of becoming an agent. And that's really hard. Agents sometimes don't have the best reputations in the world. And I know it's such a departure. And I remember some of the best advice I got was from another agent who had said, elite athletes don't always make great agents. Because of that switch, you go from being totally self-centered to you serve the athlete at every level. And that you never know when you're going to get a call in the middle of the night because an athlete has an upset stomach and they need you to run down to the store and find some Tums, or an athlete's worried about you're booking travel and you got to make sure those poles get on the plane. I mean, there's so many different details that you have to take care of for the other people. And I always looked at, so for me, I took that to heart and I said, it doesn't matter what it is. If it's negotiating a shoe contract that's going to fulfill an athlete with big financial rewards, or walking down the street to buy a Red Bull because that's what the athlete needs, it doesn't matter what it takes to set that athlete up to compete at the highest level. That's part of the job. And so for me, it was really good, but the life of an agent is really difficult because no matter how successful you are as an athlete, once you become an agent, you're kind of starting at the bottom and you got to work your way back up. And yet you're still kind of a celebrity because you know people and people know you. And I always say, it was funny. My last couple of years as an athlete, I would show up at meets to compete and people are like, man, you're still going. And then the first couple of years after I became an agent and I would show up at meets, people are like, man, it's so good to see you out here still getting after it. Well, actually, I'm no longer an athlete. I'm now an agent.
When they would say, it's amazing to see you still out here when you're an athlete, it was a double-edged sword. It was like, man, great job. Wow, you're 40, almost 40, and you're still doing it. The other hand, it was like, man, aren't you too old for this? Like, it was both compliment and a little bit of what are you doing, man?
Yeah, and a lot of times at the check-in desk, you go to the meet and the check-in desk and the person sitting behind the counter has just been dealing with athletes and agents and coaches and all kinds of people, and you walk up and they look at you and they say, athlete?
Are you someone's dad, sir? Are you looking for your son or daughter?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, we've got 4 roles to talk about. Let's actually do an overview of the other 2 roles that we're going to talk about today. And then we'll come back and kind of dive into each one more specific. Lots of questions for each one of those. So we talked about, the work you do here with us at Gill Athletics, which we're so appreciative of, your agent side of your career. You have a lot of career. Do you have like a Rolodex of business cards that are all your own? One of them's this, one of them's that. Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about some of the coaching you do. So you were able to translate some of the instructions that were given to you by mentors and coaches, Earl Bell being one and others. Now you help out not only on the elite side, which maybe we could say that's a duh, right? Because you're around them all the time. So you're there to help catch steps and give them advice, but you actually also coach on the high school level.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel like the role as a high school coach was an opportunity for me to give back to the sport in a way that almost paying it forward, but in reverse from the coaches and the people that had put time into me when I was an athlete. I wouldn't have been where I was if it wasn't for a lot of coaches spending a lot of hours after school watching me take a jump and watching me beg for one more jump as the sun was going down. And that was time away from their families, in some cases from their own kids. That was time that they committed for very little personal reward. But I appreciated that so much. And I thought, if at some point I can repay that somehow. And certainly I could never pay those coaches back personally for the time and the commitment they had given to me. But I kind of look at coaching at the high school level as a way to sort of pay back to the universe, to the pole vaulters of the future, to say, hey, I pole vaulting with Jeff Hartwig was a great experience, and he taught me something. He taught me how to pole vault, and that's a hard skill to have. And it's funny because now the kids that I get a chance to coach every day, they crack me up. They're funny, and it's really a departure from the professional side where I get the full gamut. And on the professional side, athletes are very serious. They're sometimes stressed. High school kids are stressed as well, but totally a different type of stress. They're nervous about the way they look or who's watching them, kind of thing. Whereas I think the elite athletes very much embrace being watched and being the center of attention. But of course, after putting so many hours and so much commitment into performance, you don't want to you don't want to let yourself down, or the people that support you. And so you see kind of the full gamut of that type of behaviors and emotions as well.
Yeah, the high school kid, if they don't achieve, don't win first, second, or third, or they know height, there's embarrassment. Their friends, their peers see it and everything, and their teachers maybe and stuff like that. They got to go explain it when they get home, maybe to mom or dad if they weren't at the meet. And it's like, yeah, I didn't really do all that well, and blah blah. A professional doesn't do that. Well, they may not eat the next week, right? They've got rent to pay,
Sure.
and it's their livelihood. I'm not actually, haven't been a high schooler, not having been an elite, but putting that in my mind, I'm not sure which one's worse. Would I be more? Is it worse to be embarrassed in front of my friends, or like, oh man, I screwed up, I don't get a paycheck? Well, I'll just get to the next meet and let's try to make one there. That's a tough one. Kids are not it's tough to be a teenager nowadays, is what I'm trying to say, man. I would not want to trade.
It is. And I actually said to some of my vaulters the other day, because I had gone out to the Mount Sac relays with a group of my professionals, and here we are 5 weeks before the start of the Olympic trials. We are down to the gun. It's either the work has been done and you're ready to go, or you're starting to question whether you got a chance or not, and you see those dreams sort of drifting away. And yet I see the same types of behavior in the high school kids that are getting ready for their regional championships, getting ready to go to that district track meet, because they know it's do or die time. And did they do themselves a disservice cutting out of practice one day early because they're seated 4th or 5th in the meet, and they may not advance to the next round? And that's what it's all about, is trying to advance to the next round, get to that state championship. And I think sometimes, funny as it sounds, the same emotion that an athlete feels trying to qualify for a state championship is very similar to the same feeling that an athlete has going into an Olympic trials. Certainly a different type of emotion, or certainly a different type of stress. But I think the general emotion is, I just don't want to fail. Fear of failure is such a huge influence in our lives.
Yeah.
And you put yourself out there, especially in a sport like track and field, which part of what drew me to it was, no matter how good I was at baseball, I needed somebody else on the team that could hit. And I wasn't a great hitter, but I needed somebody else. No matter how fast I was on the football field, if I didn't have blockers, or if it didn't have a quarterback that could throw me the ball, those sports, I just couldn't be good. I couldn't be a winner. But in an individual sport like track and field, you are out there in no man's land. You're all alone. And to be able to put yourself out there, it's like putting yourself out there in the business world. It's like putting yourself out there in a lot of other areas. You got to know going in that there's a chance of failure, and failure happens. And it's not really that you fail, you're going to fail. It's how you respond to it that really determines your level of success.
Yeah, that spotlight shines brightly on you when you're at the back of the runway, getting ready to start your attempt. All right, that's a good overview of your coaching. Got lots of questions that I want to ask about that. Let's do a quick overview of one of the 4th roles that you play, that you influence the sport of track and field. And I love that it's actually 4th, because leading up to, as we just talked about, overview of what you do at Gill and as an agent and as a coach, I'm hearing the same theme over and over: service back, servant leadership, giving back to the community, to the pole vault community, et cetera. And I believe this 4th one, it's all of that. Like, it's, there may not be anything but servitude towards your community. Talk to us about we'll spoiler alert, we'll talk about how Jeff has aged out of this role, but for a long time you were an integral part of the USATF organization, specifically I believe in what we call the AAC. Is that right? The Athlete Advisory Committee? Tell us about what the AAC is.
Yeah, Athletes Advisory is the athlete's voice within the organization. And through the Ted Stevens Act, that goes back to the Amateur Sports Act that was established in the 1970s, athletes in Olympic sports were given 20% representation on all voting committees within the organizational structure. Okay. So for that reason, the athletes actually have a pretty powerful role, but to make informed decisions, it has to be an active role. And earlier in my career, I had been encouraged by several coaching mentors and some other people or coaches that were kind of like mentors to me for just life in the sport. You got to get involved. You got to be involved at that next level. And I said, you know what? That's too political. I don't want to be involved. I have to remain more centrally focused on myself while I have the opportunity to jump at the highest level. But towards the tail end of my career, a few years before I retired, I said, you know what? I think this is kind of a good time to get involved, primarily because I had run the bell curve, right? I had been the struggling guy, trudging up the hill, and then I reached a pretty good peak, was kind of on top of my game for a few years, and then experienced the decline that inevitably all athletes have unless they just go out cold turkey, at the end of a championship season, having won. And so I felt like I had a very well-rounded perspective on things that could help improve the sport. But I wanted to take a role less political and more of an active role where I could be, where I could immediately have impact. So in joining AAC, which does have a lot of discussions and a lot of communication, and I was sort of mentored in AAC by a number of very experienced former athletes that were very encouraging, and I still stay close to several of them today. They helped me a ton, but more importantly, I joined the rules committee, and that as an athlete representative, there are a number of committees within USA Track and Field, and you can join those committees with the intention of taking an active role, or you can just be kind of involved and listen and hear what they have to say. And so what I did was, by being involved with the rules, there's a lot of rules we don't understand. Why do they do it that way? Why are we only allowed 2 marks on the runway in the pole vault? That makes no sense. Why can't we have 5 marks out there? Anything that ensures a vaulter will be more consistent on the runway is going to make the event safer. But now this official says, well, you can only put 2 marks, or why can we only have 2 layers of tape on the pole? Or, how come the pole is supposed to be taped a certain way? And then there's interpretation of the language of the rules, which in sitting in some of these meetings was great, because I would hear one perspective, or I would come in with an opinion about, well, this rule is written wrong. And somebody says, well, no, if you think about it like this, in just a slightly different inflection of the way it's read, and then look at the intent, well, now you do see a different perspective. So a lot of the rules committee is developing language that's easily understood and that ensures equal and fair enforcement of the rules for everybody. And the thing is it's really important for the officials to have that, because then there's no ambiguity that they get called out on to say, well, you interpreted it wrong. It should be very clear as to what's right and what's wrong within the context of the rules. And the rules give us structure. If we don't have rules, then it diminishes the validity of those great performances. And ultimately, as an athlete, you want to be respected. And I think probably the most common question that I get post-career is, where do you think you rank? Not in performance, that's easy to look at because statistically it's great, but where do you rank among the greatest pole vaulters of all time? And it's a really hard question to answer, because I wasn't super successful in championships, but I was very consistent on the main circuit. I jumped more than 100 different meets in my career over 19 feet, broke several American records, first American over 6 meters. So I had some successes that were remarkable at the time. And it's great that in one of my other roles, I'm involved with athletes that are surpassing some of the stuff that I did. And, we can talk about that a little bit more as we move forward, but athletes advisory in particular and being involved in USATF really gave me a different perspective into the inner workings of the Federation. And while I don't always agree with how and why the decisions are made, generally they're not made without some sort of discussion and consideration for all the factors. And it's a difficult role. It's a difficult role to in one sense treat all the athletes as if everybody's equal and the sport has parity among the event groups and the genders and all that kind of stuff, to what really drives the sport. What are people there to watch? What's going to move the sport forward? Are we putting the best product on the track that we can put out there? How does TV perceive where we're at? And those are all decisions that the federation has to make in terms of who gets support and who doesn't get support. Because if you offer support to every person who thinks that they're going to make it at the next level, I always say that, I always say they'd be handing out gas cards. We'd all get a gas card for a free tank of gas, and there wouldn't be much left, because a lot of people believe that they can make it, and at the end of the day, only a few do.
Yeah, that's what makes it such a special sport, right? I mean, that's
exactly.
What is the saying? If everybody could do it, then it would be that special.
If everybody could go to the Olympics, then going to the Olympics is just average.
See, that's where my role is for your guys like you, Jeff, and other people. My role is to not make the Olympics so that you guys look really
feel special. Well, I was going to suggest that possibly we just need to find a new sport.
Oh, like one of the most, probably the sport that my body type is most situated for is bowling, and I'm terrible, and I don't even drink beer, so I'm out right there. Yeah. Well, let's delve into these 4 roles a little bit deeper, Jeff. Appreciate you giving us an overview on what they are and kind of what they do. Let's back up to the very first one. You talked about David Hodge, our CEO and president, calling you up, and obviously you guys had a long relationship, and saying, hey, what are you thinking maybe when the career's over? And voila, the career was over at some point, and here you are. So I'm going to ask the greatest question I can ask you. There's a guy who has worked with you for 13 plus years now. So Jeff, what do you do for us here?
That's a great question. Yeah, sometimes I find it hard to define myself. And my actual title is a brand ambassador, and I hope that so my primary thing is to, I guess, spread sort of the goodwill, preach the gospel about the good things that the company does, and the innovations that we've done, and of all the companies in track and field, there's no company that's more innovative, more open-minded to innovation and advancing the quality of products in track and field than Gill Athletics. And I love that about the company, because once again, you put yourself out there, there's a good chance you're going to fail at some point. And when you do, you're left looking kind of foolish at times.
Here we are, baby.
And certainly that's not falling short with some of the stuff we do. But the other side of it is, I always say, who wants to drive a 1986 Accord? In 1986, that car was pretty cool. But things are different now. We want, Bluetooth, and we want self-driving cars. That's a remarkable thing, that we no longer have to put gas in them and they drive us. We don't have to drive them. We're not quite there yet, but it takes the mindset of somebody who's innovative and progressive in their thinking to drive that notion. And yet you have to be accountable to your employers. You have to be accountable to your existing customers. And you have to run a business. And at some level, businesses don't stay in business very long if they don't make a little bit of money along the way. And that usually involves decisions that limit some of that stuff, because we could just hire a bunch of R&D engineers, and we could design stuff forever, and we could do a lot of custom stuff, and it would be amazing. We've got the equipment and the tooling and the expertise within our manufacturing to do some incredible things. But that's not always practical, not always a practical application either, because of cost or something else within the sport of track and field. So there's a lot of tough decisions that get made, and thankfully I don't have to make those decisions very often. I just get to nudge them along and try to encourage those things to happen.
To give some perspective from kind of the inside, working with you, Jeff, there's 3 things. There's probably way more, but the 3 things I thought of that I really enjoy and receive value from you being on the team, which means we're giving value to our customers. One is that, just the pole vault expertise side of it. I get coaches and even some athletes at times that will call me up and they're like, hey, can you talk to me about transitioning from a 14 to a 14.6? And I'm like, no, actually, I cannot talk to you about that transition at all. And, I've always felt like for success for me, it's not about me being the smartest guy in the room. It's about me being the guy who has the most network. So it's like, oh, I can't talk to you about that. However, I got a guy, right? I'm that guy that's got a guy. It's always got a guy or a gal that knows that. So I always love that aspect of what you bring to the table from your many, many years of experience. The second thing is when we are doing new products. So whether we're working on things with the actual vaulting poles themselves or even other products, typically we involve you in things that are involved in the pole vaulting world, but we'll even, as we're thinking about something in the hurdle world or high jump world, we'll kick it over to you and just like, hey, what do you think? You've if we're doing something with crossbars, like, hey, Jeff, you've jumped over a few crossbars in your life. You've broken a few crossbars in your life. What should we be doing here? So I love that, being able to leverage your experience on that innovative side, that continually pushing the envelope that we do unapologetically. And then the third thing, Jeff, is a lot of times, even though I travel quite often, I'm not in the field as much as you. You are almost on a daily basis. You are with an athlete and or coach at the pit, right? So being able to see what's actually happening into the market and giving us that perspective is wildly helpful when we look at how do we design a catalog, a website, go to market, new products, canceling products, things like that. So talk to me a little bit about, in kind of those three examples or any others that you might have, what are some of the things that you have worked on over the 13 plus years now that's been like really cool? Like what has been like, man, I'm really glad I got to work on X, or that whether it's a project, a product, etc.
Yeah, I think probably some of the changes that we've done within the in the pole vault world. I've gotten to see the Pacer composite pole come to fruition, and it's interesting that when I finished my career as a pole vaulter, I thought I knew a lot about pole vaulting poles. I really did, and I had a great mentor, because Earl Bell was very involved with pole vaulting poles and design, and he taught me a ton about the what we call the bend profile, or the behavioral characteristics of a pole. What makes a pole actually work well, and where do you see a pole that doesn't work as well, or where do you see a vaulter getting in trouble because the pole they're jumping on sometimes isn't behaving the way it maybe would be a little better if it could do something different, kind of thing. So I think I know that. But then from a manufacturing perspective, I came into the company and I realized you couldn't turn me loose in the pole room and have me make my own pole. I wouldn't know where to start. And so I started to learn about some of those processes and how the material goes into a pole and what makes things work. And it's I tell people all the time, it's such a complicated formula of things that have to go right. And yet we take it for granted. My high school kids are using them for foot rollers with their spiked shoes on. And I'm like, yeah, bad idea. It's fiberglass. Spikes and fiberglass don't get along so good sometimes. The other thing was, one of the other projects that we did a few years ago was when we upgraded our pit design. That was actually particularly fun for me, because I always say that while I do a lot of different things, in many cases, those things complement each other. And so as I travel around the world, I get to see, at the high school level, I get to see some pretty old and battered equipment, stuff that has stood the test of time, and you see how things are holding up, be it our equipment or other people's equipment. But I think the biggest thing is, once I come over to Europe, there are several track and field equipment manufacturers. And when we worked on our pit design, it made me kind of take a step back and say, okay, what makes a good pit? What makes a good pole vault pit? What's the ideal design that you want to look at? And then how is that practical to manufacture and be able to bring to market? And once again, the innovative mindset that that produced the latest pit that we produce, it's unbelievable. It's such a good pole vault pit, and certainly better than a lot of the pits that I jumped on back in the day. And so that's where I see the product of innovation and how it advances the sport, even if we're still doing the same thing we've been doing all along, which is trying to jump as high in the air, and
Yeah.
and that's across the board. You know, our hurdles. We have some really, really amazing technology that you can't even see because it's hidden in the hurdle. But there's stuff that took a lot of really smart people, not me, but really smart people, to put together to make our hurdles functionally better than pressing those little buttons and getting your fingers pinched every time you got to raise the hurdles up and down. So that's been some fun stuff to watch and see how it comes along.
I cannot wait to tell Brian Carell that you said he was one of those smart people, because he was integral to that.
No, I didn't say Brian. I said
you said some
really
smart people. Yeah, some not.
Yeah, it wasn't including Brian in that.
Now, in podcast world, you know, time is kind of irrelevant. So by the time you're listening to this, it's June 14th. However, we're actually recording on May 20th. So by the time you're listening to this, we'll actually have a new team member here on the inside with us who's going to be a pole vault specialist. Have you, I know you probably haven't met him because he's not even here yet, but have you?
Not in person.
Yeah. You're going to love this guy. So our new sales rep that we, you know, over our pole vaulting world. So Team Pacer clubs and helping you with the Team Pacer athletes, which I'm going to get to here in a second. But River Morrow, he was a vaulter at Coastal Carolina, which is going to be a little tough for me because they're in the same conference as Troy University. So I feel like River and I are going to have some football bets going on during season, and maybe the results of conference will matter a whole heck of a lot more now to me, you know, where they place into Coastal Carolina. But yeah, I can't wait for you to meet River. You know, young guy, you know, right out of college. He's just super excited. And again, by the time this actually airs, I'll know if he's actually any good or not, because he'll be 14 days into the job. And I'm like, man, I don't know why I was talking you up so much, River. But what the reason to transition there is, you know, as we talk about what you do here at Gill and then moving on to your agent side, another responsibility that we'd be remiss to not talk about is overseeing our Team Pacer athletes. So the athletes that, you know, jump on our poles on the professional side. And, you know, again, it's May 20th. So this is probably old news by the time you're hearing it, but we're dealing with, if you're on social media, which Jeff, we got to talk about you and the lack of social media, sir. It's so disappointing. But Katie Najat, one of our best Team USA vaulters on the women's side, just had I mean, is heartbreaking the right word?
I don't think that's it's worse than that. It just crushes you, because as we said, you know, that equipment, you become so in tune with your series of poles.
Yeah.
You know exactly what to expect when you switch poles, and we do our best to put together a series of poles that are consistent, but until you jump on them, they're still not individual to you. And you know, Katie had it's happened to vaulters before. It happened to one of the other Americans earlier this year during the indoor season. He shows up at home and, you know, he picks his pole tube up and it just falls in half. And a few years ago, Alicia Newman, one of our other Team Pacer athletes, actually traveling to a meet, arrives in Doha, Qatar, and pulls the first pole out of her bag, and it's only half a pole.
Oh, I forgot about that.
All of her poles were broken. And of course, our debate was, did they get broken outside the tube, possibly in some sort of security inspection, or did they somehow put them through some kind of machine on an automated belt of some kind that's got a big motor driving it, and actually bend them enough to break them all inside the tube?
Yeah, that's what I don't get. So if you go to Katie's social media, and you got to go back like basically a month now at this point when you're listening, so you see it looks like they decided to put an accordion in the middle of the pole vault poles. I mean, they're just right in half. And that was my first thought, was because someone said, was it on the conveyor belt, and, you know, it got caught because it's too big to go around the corner or whatever. But I'm thinking, man, that has to be an amazingly, you called it big motor. I mean, you're snapping. I mean, how many poles are in each one of those bags? 5, 6,
Yeah, I think
7,
Katie had 8 or 9 poles in that bag.
8 or 9 poles. You think about, it's hard to snap one pole. I mean, to
Mhm.
physically break. Now you're putting 8 of them inside of a corrugated tube. It just feels like, I know it's not, but it feels like it's intentional. It feels like somebody's like, hey man, I bet I could put these in half and get them on the plane. I mean, it just, it just makes no sense. But I can't imagine, you give your bag of poles, super expensive, first of all. Second of all, to your point, it's like your babies. Like you intimately know your poles in your series. You give them to the airline, and then when you get to the other side, and then they present you with your garbage, essentially at that point when they're all broken.
Mhm.
The heart must just fall out of you. I mean, it must just be a gut punch, if you will.
Yeah, I think you go through a series of emotions. First is the disappointment of losing, that personal set of poles, but then immediately that kind of converts to, I think Katie sent me a picture. I was in flight traveling on a trip, and I received a text message that had a picture which I couldn't open because I was in the air. But I said, I can't see the picture until I land. What happened? And then Katie told me, and you could tell she's concerned on several different levels. Olympic trials are about a month away, and now all of a sudden she's going to have to get a whole new set of poles, and luckily we had a number of those poles in stock. Only had to make a couple, and I've already got the poles out, and we got them out very quick to get them back to her so that she can get back comfortable with that set of poles, because certainly she's done really well, and we really appreciate her jumping on the brand.
Yeah, I couldn't imagine. I mean, what are the 7 stages of grief, right? And denial, anger has to pop in really quick.
Yeah, I think that comes in pretty quick.
I'm gonna challenge all you vaulters that are out there that are listening. I want you to come up with your own 7 stages of pole vault break. When your whole series just gets broken, there's got to be a pretty unique just a range of emotions, and anger has to be in there. I can't imagine it not being in there. But Katie was so graceful, not only to the airlines, but to everything, just about hey, mistakes happen, let's get it fixed and move on. And I tell you what, when I saw her Instagram post about her explaining it and what's going to happen here moving forward, I was like, oh man, this kid's going to do pretty well. I say kid now. I still remember her jumping for Ashland like it was yesterday at the D2 Nationals, for crying out loud. But
Yeah.
this woman, I'm so sorry, Katie, you're a professional. You see, I got all caught up in apologizing to her. I don't even remember what I was going to say. But she was so great, full of grace and compassion for other people about it. It's like, oh, she's going to do okay when she gets in the heat of the battle at the trials and then the Olympics. Like that's the kind of spirit you need, of like a bounce back. Nothing's going to stop me. This is not an excuse. This is just a speed bump on the way to where my final destination is, man.
That resiliency is really important to succeed.
Yeah, resiliency. Yeah. So that's a good transition, because so as far as the work you do with Gill and the things you do with Team Pacer athletes, for our Team Pacer athletes, and then Team Pacer clubs, et cetera. And Katie is one of those. And you're also an agent. So kind of the same question I started off with the Gill side, Jeff. So what does an agent do? You talked about going to the store to buy Red Bull, but I don't feel like that's really in the job description. I mean, it's in the job description, but it's not the job description. Talk to us about what a specifically track and field agent does for its athletes.
In Europe, they don't call track and field agents, they call them managers. And I think that's a much more properly descriptive word of what we do. And the idea is that we're managing all aspects of the athlete's career. And so, as I said earlier, that means whatever needs to be done, whatever task needs to be handled. With me, the extra benefit is, particularly when it comes to pole vaulters, is you get sort of an on-the-road coach. And yet I tell people all the time, I'm far from these athletes' personal coaches. I don't coach any of them personally, but I am in contact with all of their coaches in some capacity at some point. And really what my job is to do is, when their primary coaches can't be there, it's to either focus on those specific cues that they've developed with working with their coach, or offer small bits of input. But I don't I'm not there to coach them on the same level as the day-to-day interaction they have with their personal coaches when they're training back at their home locations. But I can actually help because I do see things or know things certainly about the pole vault that I wouldn't be able to do, for instance, if I was watching somebody throwing the discus, or even hurdling. It's a knowledge base that it just gives me an advantage working for pole vaulters to have come from that area. And once again, as an agent, there's a fine balance between wanting to help young athletes to give them opportunities. And that's what I say is my role as an agent or as a manager is not to make that athlete perform at the highest level. It's to create the opportunity and provide the environment to give them the best opportunity to fulfill what they're trying to do. So we work hard to book the most convenient travel, to make sure that all of the fine details, and these days in the COVID era, the amount of paperwork and the amount of small details that have to be handled in order for that athlete not to get stressed when they show up at the airport and find out, well, they didn't take the COVID test that they were supposed to take on the day that they were supposed to take it, and now it's not valid, and so they can't fly on that day. Luckily we haven't had that happen, but that's certainly something I've heard of people having issues with. Or when the flight is delayed and they miss a flight, we deal with a lot of young athletes that are not very well traveled, and all of a sudden they're in a foreign airport and they miss a flight. The idea is that at any time of the day or night, 24 hours, they can reach somebody, and we can handle that problem in a very short amount of time. And it takes a very specialized knowledge base to try to figure that out. And sometimes organize a new flight or redo a flight or reschedule something, or when we find out that their bag got lost and they happen to throw their uniform in the bag, and now they have a contractual obligation to compete in a certain uniform, you got to know who to call to get a uniform in time if the bags aren't there. And so there's a lot of different things that you can't possibly prepare. There is no training like on the job training to get you ready. And yet when things go well, it's very gratifying.
I have to imagine your long career is unbelievably beneficial to your athletes for that exact reason. I'd have to imagine throughout your athletic career that you had a plane you either missed it or it got canceled, and you had to figure out, scramble new travel arrangements, bags, vaulting poles didn't make it to the meet, uniform, etc. I have to imagine you had some form of that through your career. And now as their manager, it's not them on their own. It's like, I've done this. Don't worry. Here's what we're going to do. Here's the plan, X, Y, Z.
Mm-hmm. It's funny because as a coach, I was once given some great advice by a great friend, Lane Lohr, who said, you can't coach an athlete like you wanted to be coached. The art of coaching is learning to connect with that athlete and figure out how to relate to them, how to push those buttons. And different athletes, even within the same group, respond differently. Some athletes like to be talked strongly to. Others like a little bit more of a nurturing approach. I look at the agent world and I say just the opposite. I want to be the agent that I wanted to be my agent. I want the agent to handle things exactly like I did, which is take care of the stuff that's important to me and let me do what I do for the other stuff. And that's when we're going to be good. And when I can develop that type of relationship, some athletes, they want you to do everything. They want you to do their entries for the U.S. championships. They want you to reserve cars, reserve hotels, do everything. Other people say, no, you know what, I'm good. I'd rather just take care of my own hotel arrangements. And when you develop that type of relationship where they can kind of do that, where you have that kind of working, in symmetry, that's when things go well, and you typically see the athletes perform really well at that point too.
So what's a typical day in a manager / agent's life? And maybe you talk to us about today, because so we're actually recording at 2:00 Gill athletics time, Gill standard time, Central Standard Time, right? But you're actually, I don't know, we were talking before we hit record, you named like 4 cities. I actually don't know where in the world is Jeff Hartwig. Talk to us about where you are right now. What's an average day look like? And maybe, just maybe, we can get a guest appearance who can, I got some questions for him on some of this agent manager stuff as well.
Yeah, so 2 days ago, I left the United States. I traveled to Ostrava in the Czech Republic. It's a small city in the western or the eastern part of the Czech Republic, kind of the complementing opposite city of Prague in the Czech Republic, which most people know where Prague is, but not many people know Ostrava. And because I travel with pole vaulters, logistically, that's number one. That's always trying to make sure we figure out how to get poles from point A to point B, and so luckily I travel a lot with Sam Kendricks, and Sam has been very forward thinking in his approach to being a professional athlete, and he has several sets of poles that we keep stashed over here in Europe. And so we had 2 sets of poles in Poland with Paweł Wojciechowski, another athlete that I represent, and Paweł was going to drive the poles down to Ostrava. And unfortunately at the meet, Paweł felt his hamstring a little bit, had to shut it down, and thought it best to go home, but he was our ride to come here. And so last night at about 9 o'clock at night, I find myself with no way to get from Ostrava, Czech Republic, to the city I'm in now, a city called Dessau in Germany, fairly close to Berlin. And the problem is I'm traveling with a pole vaulter who has poles. So it's not like we can just jump on a train or find convenient flights from small airports. We've got to deal with getting those poles. So a lot of times we're forced to drive. And so last night I ended up making a late reservation with a rental car company. And we pay a little bit extra because we got to drop the poles, or we drop the car because I can't drive it back the 6 hours that we drove today. So this morning I was up early. I met with the transportation people, arranged a ride out to the airport to pick up the car, came back, loaded up our stuff, got the poles on the car. We drove the 6 hours up through Poland, across Poland into Germany, and then had to go to a different city, a little city called Leipzig, and return the car, but then coordinate with the local transport for the meet that we're at now to come pick us up, get the poles, get the bags, and get us to the hotel. So while logistically we're only 6 hours away by car, we were about 10 hours in transit altogether just to get from one meet to the next. And went pretty smooth, and Sam's feeling good. So hopefully we'll have a good meet here too.
So it's 2 o'clock here. It's 9 o'clock there.
Yep, 9 o'clock here.
So you're in a hotel room, and we've got Sam. We've got him trapped. Did he fall asleep? He was trying not to fall asleep.
I think I've managed to keep him awake with my riveting comments here.
Sam, you just got off the couch like an old man. I heard that. You're like, ah.
I am the old guy, Mike. Jeez.
Sam, it's great to see you. I haven't seen you in quite a while, man.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Before I forget, please tell your dad and mom I said hello. Love them to death, man. That's it's a great compliment to them that the first people, well, the first people I think of when I see Sam is mom and dad. I mean, to me, that's a great reflection on the parenthood of what they did for Sam. So I just always make sure I shout out mom and dad, man. They're great people.
Well, my mom, she was a blessing, and she fixed everything my dad messed up, so I turned out decent, I guess.
What's awesome is your dad would say the exact same thing. I love it.
Oh, he's a little rough around the edges and getting rougher.
So Sam, appreciate you guest star in this. I did not know this was going to happen here, so I love this. But you just heard some of the things that Jeff does as an agent / manager. He mentioned that some athletes like like to be talked to kind of sternly. Other ones like a little bit, maybe more, my words here, kid gloves. So who are you, Sam? Are you a kid glove kind of athlete, or are you a stern?
Think Mariah Carey times like 10. That's me. Right. I'm putting Jeff out. I said, Jeff, I need the spread when I get there. I want you to let me out. I want the long car, Spread it out for me, man.
You're
no. You know, it's you got to have a little bit of realism when you come into this sport. Everybody's got glossy eyes when they think about professional track and field. And I didn't start out with that because, you know, the first thing I started out with was Jeff. And I didn't know it from the get-go. And I didn't mean to throw you under the bus with that. But the first thing from the get-go is you got to know what's real, you know, because Jeff and I were talking about today is that your expectations of the sport are going to really lead your career up or down. If you're expecting the heavens to fall down before you, good luck making it happen. But, you know, some really cool stuff can happen along the way if you just keep your head level and kind of try to see the ground for what it is. And Jeff's really good at that. And I think he is, I don't think everybody would say this. You know, I'm a little hard to swallow sometimes. My wife says that. That I'm really hard to handle. My personality is kind of in your face a little bit. And I'm not a dramatic guy. Jeff tells it straight up to me, and that's the way I need it. He's not going to sugarcoat it for me. He's going to fill in all the things I can't do, because he said it so true earlier. And that's the part I hate about being a professional athlete. I hate it because he said you have to be selfish. And that is for where I came from, like you were saying, that's the hardest thing to learn. And you have to you gotta put pressure on people. And especially being coached by a father, being selfish is the last thing to make that relationship work. So how do you be selfless and selfish at the same time? Because I have to be thankful, because the only reason Jeff's here in Decel right now is because of me. And if he can help me do what I need to do, then it's worthwhile. Otherwise, why the heck are we even here? So if I got to get some sleep, if he's got to drive, if I got to drive, if somebody's got to fill in the gaps and do all the bureaucratic stuff and get me from point A to point B, I say, Jeff, send me my ticket. I'll get there. I'll meet you there. You can work on me when I get there. But I expect a lot from him, and in turn that he hopes the best for me. And I think that is the truest way you can describe an athlete and an agent's relationship. I expect a lot of him as my manager, and I'm thankful for him. And he has the highest hopes for me, because I want to, you know, it's my nickel that's got us over here for sure. And I want to make it worthwhile for all of us.
You know, you brought up a really good point there about, you know, the back and forth of selfless versus selfish. And a lot of times I actually did some, as much as you can without being in a formal educational setting, did some research on that. And what I mean by that is most of us think of, I looked at it in the sense of a track coach. You know, my passion is track coaches and what they do for this great sport and for our society. And a lot of times we will say, and it's true, a track coach is immensely selfless, right? Like, look what they do. They coach other people's kids. They're out there, quote unquote, 24/7. They're available 24/7, et cetera. That's so selfless. And we think of it as this like 100% to 0%, right? So 100% you're selfless. When in fact, if you're 100% selfless, you're actually selfish, because as a track coach, stay with me, Sam. Don't you, I see you.
I'm working on it. You're taking me down this road. I'm going to follow you. Okay.
We're going to get there. So if you're selfless, you're always giving to your kids, your athletes, you're always available to them. You're coaching all the time. You're always doing coaching, education, et cetera. Well, you're being selfish with your spouse, your kids, your life, maybe your faith, et cetera. So what we really need to be working on is not this 100 or 0. It's more of this maybe 51-49. Now I'm talking about it in the relationship as a track coach. As an athlete, I kind of, as you were talking about, I started kind of thinking through that lens, and I can see the fact of like, oh, you as an athlete, you have to be maybe majority of selfish, because it's your body on the line. Like you have to be at the tip top to be at the tip top, right? So you got to be healthy, rested, stress-free, et cetera, because you're being selfless actually at the same time. Because why are you, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but why do you actually compete? But what are the things that happen? Why do you compete? What are some of the things that happen because you decide to be a professional pole vaulter, Sam?
Well, like I said, realistically, you can't stay on the road if it's not a business, and it's not a business. Mm-hmm. And you guys are talking about the difference between the high school expectations and the professional expectations. And that is the truth. The expectations are the difference. If you're independently wealthy and you want to go be a track athlete and you want to stay fit and you can get invited to meets, that's your life. But there's not many people that live that one. Capitalizing on opportunities that are few and far between that matter is my cross to bear. That's exactly what it is. And the selfishness comes with, I have to be able to get the things I need. I have to ask. I have to ask in a lot of times, and I need other people's help. You have to recognize that. But at the same time, the failures are mine and mine alone. Jeff says it so well, and he said it to me in the past. He said, Sam, there's two types of athletes. There's types of athletes that have a balanced life, and I'm not trying to make some, I can paint you a poetic view of athletics and make it just seem so rosy to you. There's people that have a balanced life on the track, and there's people that they have to have what's between the lines to live. And you'll separate yourself, and that's where you get the divas in the sport. They separate themselves from that life that they'll eventually have to go back to. You guys talked about that earlier. And they're drawn to this because it is awesome. And if I could give you a piece of it, I could wrap with a bow. Most people might not be able to handle it. When you have 55,000 people in a London stadium looking at you, screaming your name, clapping for you because they want you to win, what are you going to do? Well, you're going to lose most of the time. That's kind of how that goes.
Well, you just dashed every athlete's hopes that are listening right there. They're like, yeah, what do you do? Wait, you lose? Oh, son of a.
You're going to lose most of the time. And I have spent most of my life getting beat. And that is, it seems like every Facebook ad that says, oh, you gotta fail so much that you almost forget where you started. No. You got to have some success in track, or else you're just messing up something. But being selfish is that I got to own that failure. I got to own that failure. And it takes I'm not saying I'm big because I'm definitely not smart. It takes a big well to draw upon in order to internalize that failure and make it turn into something in the future. You've only got so many bullets in your chamber, and you're going to run dry if it's not working out. You got to gain that momentum. A good manager is going to make you feel like you're a hero all the time. I show up, it's all laid out for me. All I got to do is give my best on the track, but that's what you got to do. And more often than not, you got to bring the show with you, especially as a pole vaulter. And you've got to be a personality that's on the track. And the coolest thing about a manager and the manager's job, and also a coach manager's job, is to, hey, I want to just fill in the gaps. And I just want to fill in the gaps. I want to make you feel like a hero, because I know you're going to jump great when you do feel great. And everybody's different. Everybody's going to have a different mold. It's some not safe for work stuff. It goes on the road because it's so much it's such an emotional roller coaster for everybody. Everybody's on a completely different path in their life to get there. But they all started with a coach like you, Mike, that really cared about them. Sometimes we get away from that. There's nobody that ended up on this stage that's really honest with themselves, that they said, I did it all by myself. They're not being honest with themselves. You'll hear it. It'll stand out to you as well. But you just don't want to be that guy that when you get to the end of your career, you don't have any friends.
Yeah, I've often told other vaulters, my approach was, and I think the best advice I can give any vaulter is, treat every day like it's the last day that you'll ever get to do this sport.
Oh man, yeah.
Because one day it will be.
One day it will be.
And as a manager or as an agent, is to try to make sure that each day that those athletes go out there, they've got the best possible opportunity to have that great day, because they're so limited. And the life of an athlete is so different than the life of another person, even a coach. When you develop those personal skills to connect with athletes, and we know so many great coaches that are really good at that, and they've done that for years and years. They're just infectious to even listen to them talk. We also know those coaches that are great coaches, but the science of training athletes to perform better, it hasn't changed. There's no new fancy thing. So once you develop your routine and you get into that rhythm of being able to be the coach that you've always wanted to be, and you start to have that success, We're doing a little lighting adjustment here.
Yeah,
There we go. Here's the hammer right there.
I'm gonna have to put in the credits, lighting director.
Absolutely. I try to make my boy Jeff look good. Okay, I try to make him look good.
Yeah, he's actually my agent for podcasts.
You should have seen us at dinner tonight. I looked like a total mini Jeff. I was walking out to dinner, had my meal ticket in hand, had a big smile on my face, had a laptop in one hand, and a get it done kind of attitude. That's what you got to have, Mike. A get it done kind of attitude, because this sport don't stop for nobody.
I have lost control.
Yeah. All right, Jeff, I'm gonna need an ice bath later, so we're gonna work on that.
All right, we're gonna do that.
Bye, buddy.
Jeff, he's got to be careful. He tried to lob up a real easy joke there. He goes, Mike, I'm not the smartest guy around. And as a former Mississippi State coach, and as him being an Ole Miss alum, I saw it, and I was like, he better be glad he kept talking, because
he's smart enough. He may not be that smart, but he's smart enough to keep talking and not let you knock that one out of the park.
I was ready. I was like, oh yeah, take a breath, man, take a breath. Well, we certainly appreciate Sam. It is 9:00 there. Does he compete tomorrow?
Yeah, actually, okay. This trip is because of the scheduling. The biggest disappointment for the professional athletes was probably, for sure it was the cancellation or the postponement of the Olympics last year, but just the complete disruption to the normal routine, because that normal routine is filled with stress and expectation and routine that all got disrupted all at once because of COVID. And so then going into this year, I think there was a lot of skepticism. Are we going to have a circuit? Are we going to be able to travel? Are we going to be able to leave the country? Are we going to have the Olympics? Are they going to happen? Are we going to have fans? So many unknowns to add to the stress of the normal trying to get ready to go compete and try to make an Olympic team. Right. And we've been very fortunate. We've been very fortunate to have a lot of hardworking people. And once again, those selfless people that say, we have to keep the sport moving forward. And as an agent, I'm not an individual. I work for Paul Doyle, Doyle Management Group. Paul is the most selfless of all the agents out there. There's nobody that puts more time and more energy into creating opportunity, not only for the athletes that we represent and doing a good job of fulfilling their expectations, but producing events. We've started this American Track League where Paul works hard every single day, and there's virtually no time from 6 o'clock in the morning till 2 o'clock in the morning that I can't call Paul and he's picking up the phone. And usually jumping into a conversation before I even get a chance to ask him a question, because
that's a skill.
There's something on his mind. And that's hard to do. That's really hard to do. But that's the kind of people I think that we're sort of infectiously drawn to, and at the same time envious of their skill and their tenacity as well.
Yeah, certainly. Shout out to Paul Doyle. In fact, if you didn't get to listen to our episode with Paul, where we talk about the American Track League, in your app there for your podcast, if you just search Gill Athletics Paul Doyle, it'll bring it right up. Just a great definition of servant leader. He's working so hard behind the scenes. We get to watch TV and watch the athletes compete and do awesome and win medals, and we cheer them on for Team USA. But there's this whole team behind that team, from agents, managers, of course, athletic trainers, massage therapists, etc., coaches that are just as invaluable. So that's a good transition. Some of the things that Sam we're talking about, and you were talking about too, that third role we were talking about is coaching. What I wanted to know, Jeff, in your role as a high school coach, if back in part one, we learned about how you just showed up as a middle schooler to the before school practice. Have you found, and no pressure to any of the kids when I say this as far as like the reaches of where you got to, but have you found the next Jeff Hartwig? And I mean that like the passion. Have you found that kid's like, oh yeah, I'll be there at 6 a.m. I'll be there at 4 a.m. What do you need? Have you found that yet? How's that going coaching high schoolers?
Oh, I've had the opportunity to work with some incredibly good kids, and it's given me a even greater appreciation for what it takes to reach that highest level. And back to our part one, where we talked about Malcolm Gladwell and this idea that sometimes kind of the circumstances and the decisions you make that influence things, down the road, you don't even realize. And there's so many things that can derail potentially great careers. And I had a young man a couple of years ago that my throws coach says, you got to let this guy try pole vaulting. And I said, how old is he? And he said, he's a senior. And I said, no. I said, this guy could be a really good athlete, and I could do an incredibly good job of coaching this kid. And he could jump 12 feet, which would be remarkable in the first year of pole vaulting. And that does nothing at the high school level. And I said, it's not that I don't want to waste my time with him, or that I feel like it is a waste of time, but there's a finite amount of energy that we have to spend the time with the kids. And we do have a good program at the school that I coach at. And so he says, look, this kid's driving me nuts. Just let him try. And I said, okay, he's got one day. And he comes over and I show him a few basic things. Here's how you hold the pole. You kind of jump up, you do this. And he had kind of seen some of the other kids jumping. And I've never seen this before. He jumped 10-6 the first day. Wow. He touched a pole vault pole with a crossbar. He jumped 10-6. He could take off. He could swing. He could turn over the bar. He didn't go over on his back.
Yeah.
And he jumped 10-6. He jumped 11 feet the second day he ever touched a pole, to the point that I said, come on, you had to have at least tried this sometime before. And he said, no, coach, never. Never done it. And he went on to jump 13-6. That as a senior, in the year that he pole vaulted, now he's gone on, he's pole vaulting in college. Where that's going to lead, it's so hard to say.
Yeah.
And just the same as, most people would have, all through my career, would have said, no, it's not, he's not the future. He's not the guy. But certain things fell into place for me. Had I been a couple years older or a couple years younger, I wouldn't have been in the situation that I was when I graduated from college and had the opportunity to stay with Earl, go through the building of Bell Athletics, and then watch that, be a part of that training center as it developed, and be the direct benefactor of all of Earl's experience. Somebody else would have been in that role. And it wouldn't have been me. And I was just in the right place, the old saying, the right place at the right time. It's such an understated thing sometimes.
We talk sometimes amongst coaches that today's athlete, which is a farce, because if you go back and ask the 80s athletes, I bet this would be the same, that they don't know a lot of today's stars. You go to the high school team and you say, hey, do you know Katie Najat? And they're like, no, don't know who that is. And, she's one of our best on Team USA, and extrapolate that out to, Trevon Bromels, et cetera. They don't know. Do the high school kids and the elites that you're working with, do they know, this is going to sound so conceited, and it's not meant to be conceited, Jeff, do they know who you are? Like, and I added the elites to it because, you're dealing with a bunch of mostly 20 to 30, or they're still very young individuals. Do they know, they're like, oh my gosh, no, this is Jeff Mofo Hartwig here coaching us? Or is it just like, oh yeah, here's this tall guy that I think he was good at pole vault, I don't know.
Yeah, no, it's actually funny because they don't, I think that they don't really connect with me on that level, because many times they come into the sport, they're just interested in doing track. They're just interested in doing a sport. And then as they get into it, they start to gain a little bit more of an appreciation once they learn a little bit more, and then they've tried it themselves. Because, I think with anything, I say, I don't care what you do. If you're the best in the world at it, that's incredible. There's some merit to being the best it is. And we may not respect, somebody who does curling or ping pong or, table tennis, whatever you want to call it, but for the people that are really the best in the world at it, it's an incredible skill that takes those years and years. And while I can appreciate it, because I can appreciate anybody that's reached that level of proficiency, I think the kids just say, hey, they had, well, I actually take pride in the fact that when I go to them, they ask me to jump. Can you jump for us sometime? And I said, well, maybe someday I'll play around and I'll jump a little bit. Keep in mind, first off, it's not going to look like it did when I showed you that video of me jumping. And second, they actually, I think, appreciate me more for the fact that I show up every day that I can, and they understand the days I can't, but I show up every day and selflessly just want to see them get better. Right. And we try everything. And I bring a lot of resources because of my experience that a lot of coaches don't have the advantage of. And, you know, I think that one of the greatest compliments I ever got as a coach was actually from my father, because just like my dad would go to my high school track meets, and when I was in high school, he still goes to my high school meets. And when the parents of my high school kids are standing at the fence watching their kids jump, they say, who are you out here watching? Thinking he's a grandfather. And he says, well, actually, the coach is my son.
Wow.
And my dad actually said to me one time, he said, you know, you don't always have the best athletes out there, but your kids can actually pole vault. They actually know how to pole vault. And I take that as just the same as my role as a manager, as an agent, is to facilitate the small details that give the athletes the opportunity to perform at the highest level. As a high school coach, I look at the college system as the developer of the athletic talent. You know, but the high school coach has such a big influence on teaching the basic fundamentals. And kind of setting those neural pathways that make us perform this very complex movement on a wildly bending pole that's not a natural act. I've had divers, wrestlers, gymnasts, dancers, a full array of previous athletic experiences come to me as pole vaulters, and I have yet to find the one natural previous sport, with the exception of gymnastics to a degree, that sets you up to be a pole vaulter. It's such a specialized learned skill, and that is the great equalizer for the event, is everybody has to learn how to do it, and everybody learns a little different.
Well, first of all, shout out to Dad. I love that he has such pride in you as a son, that as the coach, he that's amazing. Yeah. Like, shout out, Dad. That's awesome. Number two, you said something about curlers and table tennis. If I get hate mail from people in that community, I'm just sending it straight to you, Jeff. I did not bring that up. In fact, I have a wicked two-handed backhand in ping pong, so I have so much respect for ping pongers, for table tennis people.
Funny enough, when we're traveling the circuit, we get into some pretty mad ping pong matches. Yeah. And actually what I said was incredible skill. It's really an appreciation of how great an athlete is. And I tell my young athletes all the time, it may not be a sport that you directly connect to or that you respect, but when somebody's the best at their craft, that's something to be appreciated. And
we see it the reverse, right? The other sports who either don't know anything about track and field / athletics, or think, oh yeah, big deal, I can run as fast as that person, or you see them jumping on that stick, I could do that too. We see that same, while it is manifested in disrespect, it's really misunderstanding. They don't know what it's like. And we got a peek into that world right recently with the DK Metcalf situation, which I really, that was very polarizing in the sport of track and field. What I loved about it was, first of all, that he went out and he ran a respectable time, not a respectable time on the elite circuit, meaning 10.3 is not going to get you to the trials, etc. But he was so respectful of the athletes. He's like, oh yeah. Like, I'm paraphrasing, but he said, yeah, these guys kick my butt because they're the real fast ones. Like, I'm fast, but here's what real speed is all about right here on this track. Kind of related, unrelated. Trayvon Brumell had a tweet out here recently, and again, it's probably a month old by the time you're listening to this. He's put a tweet out that I think it was something like 191. Only 191 individuals have run sub 10. That's amazing. I mean, out of the billions of people that are on the earth today and have been on the earth, less than 200 people have run sub 10. It's interesting because on the circuit, someone runs 999. We kind of just like, oh, okay, big deal. You're supposed to, right? But it's like, dude, less than 200 people. I just found that fascinating. That few, I don't know why I thought it was a lot more, but it was amazing.
It's remarkable when you talk about those percentages, and
Yeah.
Sam and I were talking about that on the drive here. Expectations, because as an athlete, you have certain expectations of your management team. You have certain expectations of the meet organization to set a timetable and a height progression, and hopefully provide a venue with good weather. If that's a part of the expectation.
You're responsible for that.
At the same time, the meet organization has an expectation of the management teams that they work with to contract these athletes to come in, that the management teams are going to get the athletes there in the best possible shape, the best possible condition to perform at the highest level. And then they also have an expectation that those athletes are going to perform. And, we watched last night in Ostrava, we watched the guy who broke the world record last year in the 5,000, Chepta guy. He ran the 10,000 and he ran 26:33 or something like that. I mean, absolutely remarkable. One of the fastest times ever run. And it was just amazing to watch him run, but he didn't break the world record. So was it a disappointment in some people's eyes because he didn't break the world record? And so Sam posed a very good question. He says, what is the expectation when I show up to compete? And I said, I think deep down at the heart of it is that everybody wants to feel like you gave your best possible performance on that day. And they understand if it's not your best performance, and yet they are rewarded quite often because you're so consistent to consistently produce great performances. I said, but you got to remember that last night Sam jumped against Mondo, and the rest of the field wasn't quite as high of a level. And so really Sam and Mondo kind of stood out amongst that field. And, the meet record was actually Sam's. It's 593, about 19.5. It's always special to get something around the 6 meter mark, 19.8. And yet we get there, it's a little bit cool. The winds aren't exactly great. And Sam and Mondo put on a great show like they always do. Couple lead changes right up to the very end. The final height's only separated by 5 centimeters, with Mondo winning at 590 and Sam second at 585, 19.4 and 19.2. And it was a great show. But I said, you got to remember, Sam, when they bring you and Mondo in, they're bringing 2 of maybe 4 or 5 guys on the whole planet of 8 billion people that can jump 595 or 6 meters, which is what it takes to break that record. And I said, so yes, there is always an expectation that they've brought the guys in that can do it.
Right.
But at the same time, they feel like if you guys give it your best and maybe fall a tiny bit short, 2 centimeters, 3 centimeters, nobody's going to be disappointed because they still got to see a great show.
So, numbers are numbers, right? And we use that example that Trayvon gave us of, 191 or 171 sub 10. 6 meters is just a number, 6 meters, 20 feet. It's just a round number. That's why we use it. However, we use it. So you mentioned Mondo. We obviously you got Sam here for a little while. We have you. There's 3 6 meter plus jumpers. How many people, do you know it off the top of your head? How many people have jumped 6 meters or greater?
26.
How many?
26.
26 people in the world have jumped 6.00 meters or higher.
Right. Yeah, 26 people. And we actually were joking that when I was sitting at the table having breakfast the other day with Mondo and Sam, I said, gosh dang, I'm the 3rd worst guy at the table. And my PR is 6:03. I've jumped 19.9.
One day, talking about 6 meter jumpers, I had this idea for the podcast of having you and Derek and Toby all together.
Yeah.
Just to tell stories. I mean, literally, I'd just sit back and let you 3 because that was a really magical time. When I came into Gill, you three were at the top of the world,
Wow.
certainly the top of in America, and three distinct personalities that are all positive and fun and hardworking. And you three have all gone from great athletes to great post-athletic careers as coaches and fathers and coaches of champions. I mean, it's amazing. And what you do as a coach, as a manager, you're essentially a coach. And what you do coaching high school, it's just amazing to see what you.
Well, I'll tell you, speaking of the 6 meter thing, I don't know if you see all of Sam's posts, but a funny statistic that was really interesting was a few years ago, we were at the US championships, and it was shortly after Sam had become the latest American to jump 6 meters. And somebody, and by coincidence, because we're all involved, every American that's ever jumped 6 meters is still involved in the sport. Myself, Brad Walker, Toby Stevenson, Tim Mack. And so we were all there, and somebody said, let's take a picture with all the 6 meter guys with Sam, the newest 6 meter guy. So we were sitting kind of in this area, and we all kind of got together, and we took a picture. And in the background, leaning on the fence, was Casey Lightfoot. And
I
this year,
saw that.
Yeah, this year when Casey Lightfoot became the latest American to jump 6 meters, Sam, being Sam, remembered that photo, somehow found it, and realized that Casey was in the background of that photo. And he sent it to Casey, and he said, dude, this photo still has every American who's ever jumped 6 meters in it.
I don't know where I saw it on social, of course, but
it was cool. It was really cool.
Sam or if Pole Vault Power, Becca posted or something, but I did see that.
Yep.
I don't know Casey well enough. I thought I understood what they were saying, but I was like, so I think I was like, hey, so is that Casey? Because I definitely, I'd recognize him now. He jumped for Baylor, which we're kind of big Baylor fans around here.
Sure.
For you guys that don't know, we talked about David Hodge, our president, CEO, also a Baylor alum, 4-time All-American, pole vaulter. So pole vaulting and Baylor is pretty important to him. So therefore, because he's my boss, it's also very important to me. So I'd recognize Casey now, and I've met him a couple times. What a great person. I mean, just he fits this 6 meter mold, if you will, like great people, they just happen to be awesome pole vaulters as well, but really great people. But that was such a cool picture. Like that's one of those you see where like the married couple who somehow have a picture of when they were kids at the beach, but they were, they obviously didn't know each other. That's so freaky, man. That's awesome.
A very bizarre circumstance that Casey happened to be the guy in the background leaning against the fence, kind of blurry.
Yeah.
And then becomes the next guy after that group.
And then find it.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, that's a skill in its own. I just had a Twitter exchange with good friend, Ibrahim Kabia. He's the sprint coach at Minnesota. He dissed me. He did not sign with me when I was at Mississippi State and went to Minnesota. I've forgiven him, but he was going back and forth with one of his athletes, and so I said something smart about they were wearing the same shirt and smiles and all that kind of stuff, and within seconds, Kabia posted a picture of he and I from when I taught him at level 1, USATF level 1 education, and Kabia was wearing the sweatshirt that all the other people were wearing, and I thought it was just so funny, but I was like, oh my God, how did you find that picture? Like that was from like 12 years ago, bro. Like, that's a skill, man. I don't know how you do that. Well, Jeff, as we start to wrap up today, the last thing, the role, and you play many roles, but last role we were talking about today is this AAC role at USATF. And, I kind of joked and said that you aged out of it. They have term limits, and you've served there for a long time and have now surpassed that term limit. What do you feel? I mean, it's as if you're not doing enough, Jeff, with coaching and working here at Gill for the pole vaulters, team pacer, and also coaching. What do you foresee your role becoming in regards to USATF, whether it's still just being an advisor to people that are on the AAC, eventually moving to, you run the rules committee, which I had participated in quite a few years. Love that committee. Never thought I would be working on what are the definitions of the word shall and should, and will, like, I'll, if you don't know what shall and should mean, you need to look it up, because that's what you need to know to understand the rule book. But what do you see in regards to our governing body? What roles that you might take in the future, or you might even have now that we haven't discussed?
Well, I've often said that the athletes of today's USA Track and Field Federation have more opportunity and more support than they've ever had previously. USATF has really taken a progressive role to help. We're one of the few federations in the world that pays prize money for our national championships, and we don't have to. In 3 out of 4 years, we're selecting a team, and everybody's going to show up because they know they got to make the team, and yet we pay prize money, and most federations don't. And so there are opportunities that athletes don't have, and yet it still falls short of coming through at a level that many more athletes that are dedicated and committed to their craft of becoming the best athletes can truly call themselves professionals. We have a lot of guys struggling, a lot of athletes that struggle to stay in the sport. And there's a natural weeding out process that's probably for good reasons. There is something special to that ability to perform at that high level. And so I feel like my role, I was 12 years in the role, because you're allowed to serve out the terms that you're elected to. And I was elected in most of those different roles that I did. So that was a reflection, I think, of some of the appreciation, I guess, or respect that some of my peers showed me. And I had a chance to learn not only about the inner workings of the federation, but also the inner workings of the sport, learn about the concerns and the challenges that a lot of events face. In the pole vault, we have the luxury of having things like street events. Last year, the Lausanne Diamond League chose the pole vault as the standalone event to serve as the Diamond League event for Lausanne. And, we had the men and women in Stockholm last year, and the pole vault does happen to be very, very popular. I remember sitting in a meeting years ago with one of the long throwers, a javelin thrower, and he says, I haven't competed domestically in 5 years, other than all comers meets that I just sign up for. The javelin hasn't been featured. Well, he was the only, at that time, really high level javelin thrower that the US had. And, maybe for good reason. There's a whole lot of guys with good arms that are probably throwing little white balls that, that aren't picking up the javelin. But there is an opportunity there, not at the same level as we would see in baseball. So I think that's the thing is there's always a discussion about what drives the sport. Do we focus on elite development because that's going to set the example and draw people into the sport? Because we know when those guys sign those $300 million contracts in baseball, that's a lot of stimulus. That's a lot of motivation for a young kid to get out there and start throwing baseballs back and forth or spend a little extra time in the batting cage. Track and field certainly not like that. So you really have to be a passionate about the sport, but yet there are opportunities to be a full-time professional athlete in the sport. And does that start with grassroots development, or does it trickle down from the top where we have the world's greatest track and field team and people aspire to be on that team? So there are certainly challenges, and I would like to see my role continue. This is my first year timed out as under what they call the tenure rule, where you can serve. So at this point, with everything that's happened and a lot of increased workload because of COVID, I'm actually kind of grateful to have a chance to kind of step back and take a breath. But I've already reached out to several people within USA Track and Field about continuing my role in some capacity, and then maybe finding a new direction in the future that allows me to continue to serve the sport, but also be involved and see how the sport works and maintain a lot of great relationships and things with friends and people that I've known for years.
Well, we've got to keep our good people in the sport past their athletic prime, right? We definitely enjoy watching athletes compete, and getting to see, we get to live our lives through them, right? When someone wins the gold medal, it's like, we're in the backyard as a kid when we won the gold medal, but after that fact, we need to keep the ones who have the interest level to help keep advancing the sport. We need to keep them in the sport in all fashions, whether it's coaching, club development, USATF governance, etc. So it's
And
good.
and I think that, the pole vault sort of selects people to do that naturally.
Mm.
If you look at some of our past stars of the pole vault over the last 25 years, Brad Walker, full-time pole vault coach, along with going to chiropractic college, and his motivation to go to chiropractic college is additionally to help benefit athletes. That's his primary interest, is to work in that direction. Jeremy Scott, who, an Olympic pole vaulter, is now in a few weeks, going to start his residency to become a medical doctor, which he is specializing in sports medicine related things to give back to the sport. Tim Mack is the coach at the Spire Center up outside of Cleveland. Derek Miles, the coach at University of South Dakota. Nick Hysong running his club in Phoenix, Arizona. Stacy DeGrila running her club up in Idaho. There's a lot of people that have kind of found their path to be involved. I coach high school. I'm not coaching the elite level people, but I'm still very involved with the sport. And so we all kind of find our way, because the sport sucks you in and it keeps you going. And, it can be frustrating like anything, I think, but it's so rewarding, and the chance to go out and see some of these great things. I saw a guy throw 94 meters last night in the javelin, and another guy run 26:30 in the 10,000. And I got to see two guys jump. When I'm at meets, I take a lot of video for Sam, and I send those videos to people. I text people the videos sometimes, and they're almost getting those videos in real time with what I'm doing. And mostly it's my daughter, but she just gets a kick out of the fact that I'm in Ostrava, Czech Republic, which she has no idea where that is, sending her videos of Sam, or, FaceTiming with Sam as I'm driving down the highway in Germany. She just thinks that's pretty cool. So it is rewarding from that perspective, that even when I have to be away, I can still bring a little piece of my world back to my world at home and stay connected with the people that I care about, that are not getting to travel and do the things that I get to do.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I would like to say that you live a semi-charmed life, right? But there is a lot of work that goes into it. When you travel a lot, people who don't travel a lot think like, oh, it must be like the most luxurious thing to do in the world. And it's like, yeah, no, I just travel domestically, and I know how old it gets. Those 12-hour plus flights you take, man. I'm happy just to stick my butt here in the U.S. and do the planes, trains, and automobiles over here. So, but Jeff, man, I'm just so thankful that you would spend time with us again, man. Again, if you did not check out part 1 with Jeff, he made a lot of allusions. How do you say that? Not illusions. You talked a lot about some of the stories we talked about. Remember, I went to school in Alabama.
A lot of references to those
references.
times.
Yeah. See, I'm trying to use these big words, man. I'm glad Sam's not here. His Ole Miss education, he'd have come at me in my choice.
Fired back at you there.
Thank goodness. But you made a lot of references to your growing up, Jeff, the athlete. So definitely go back and check out episode 102. That was our part 1 with Jeff, where we talk all about his athletics. And there was a lot of great, just a lot of great lessons in the athlete of Jeff Hartwig. A lot of great mentors that poured into him. And now it's honestly just so cool to see Jeff in the many roles that you play. And one of those that we didn't talk about is mentor. You are now the mentor in big part of young people's lives, whether it's the high school kids that are getting to work with an Olympian. I mean, that's a rare air right there, by the way, for the athletes that you manage, and then just being a fan. I mean, one of the things that I love so much about you, Jeff, is you really root for everybody, whether they are in your agency or not, whether they're a pole vaulter or not. You have every experience that I've had watching you at meets, the few meets that I get to go to where you're at, you're always serving others. You're always, how can I help you? Oh, do you need me to get this? Okay. Do you want me to watch this? Okay. You talk about the video, things like that. It's just, you're a true giver in that sense, man. And that just, I think that's why, I consider you such a good friend. And it was always, shocking to me when you and I first met, because I knew who you were. I'm not like these high school kids. I knew who you were. And I was like, what is Jeff Hartwig gonna like he'll work with us, but he's not gonna work with me because I'm not a pole vaulter. I got nothing to offer Jeff Hartwig. He's freaking Olympian. Get out of here, right? And you never, like, the best compliment I can give you, and really this is a compliment for your parents, and so make sure dad knows that I said this, that you didn't care that I wasn't an elite vaulter or a vaulter at all. Like you saw me as who I am. And I think that's something that you do for everybody. You see Danielle as she is, you see Mark as he is, you see Joe as he is, not in some rarefied air. You get to hang out with some of the best athletes in the world, but you treat everybody as if they're a 6-meter jumper in that sense. You give a lot of respect to people, man. That's the best compliment I can give you. And like I said, really, it's a compliment for your parents, because that's how they raised you, my man.
No, thank you. I'm sure they would appreciate that, and I do too.
Yeah, well, FaceTime him and tell him or something. Come on, man. Don't keep this one to yourself. Let him know. I just love that story, that visual I have of your dad now at the track meet, and someone's like, "Oh, who are you watching? Who's your kid?" And you're like, "Yeah, to see that tall one, the old one. That's my kid."
Yep, that's my kid.
All right, man. Jeff, thank you so much. Hey, by the way, Jeff mentioned a lot of different club coaches and clubs and things like that. If you're interested in the pole vault and clubs and things like that, if you go over to www.teampacer.com, we have a section there for clubs. We have several clubs around the country that are Team Pacer sponsored clubs for pole vaulting, and some for other events, but mainly for pole vaulting. And then also, I just had to give a shout out to our Team Pacer athletes, our pole vaulters out there. Same place, teampacer.com. Go to the athletes tab, and you'll see athletes from literally around the world that have chosen to jump on our poles. And, to you guys and gals that might be listening right now who do that, we say thank you from all of us at Gill Athletics. The trust that you give us to, have a great time vaulting means the world to us. So we're just so thankful for all of our Team Pacer, official Team Pacer athletes, and then all of you out there in the college and high school, club, masters that choose to jump on our poles. Man, we're just so thankful and humbled that you would choose us. So thank you so much. And Jeff, again, thank you for being here. Listeners, appreciate you so much. If you received value from today's show, I'm willing to bet someone else in your network would probably receive value as well. Don't just share. I know you're going to share this to all your vaulters in your life, but a lot of lessons here on servant leadership that I think other people, other coaches of throws and sprints and distance. If you give this to a distance coach, tell them we talked about the 10K. That'll hook them right there. They'll start listening right there. But
draw them right in.
Share it to your network, Twitter, TikTok, Facebook, whatever. Jeff's not going to see it. We didn't even get into this, but Jeff is on. He's on a full-time social media sabbatical his whole life. It's embarrassing. I'm so disappointed in him, because my love for social media. I have given up. I'm not even going to try to get him on social media. It's just who he is. But the cool thing is you can Google him and check out his Wikipedia page. Thank you so much for being here today. Appreciate you guys so much. Have an awesome day, and join us next week when we'll have another awesome, probably a coach, but we'll have someone awesome back here on the Connections podcast. Have a good one.